Hi BookTube, and welcome to a new video. This is a sort of equivalent of a Brian hodgepodge video because it's got several different streams. So the first thing to say is I haven't done a video for a while because I've not been reading much, because last week I took off from work as annual leave and sunk myself back into writing, which is immensely pleasurable. So when lockdown hit in March 2020, I started a new project that I'd been batting around but hadn't really sort of committed to, but I thought with that sort of stretch of time ahead I'd try it. And I can't remember how many months I wrote for, which was ended by being successfully commissioned, well, not commissioned, but Stories We Tell Our Children, my latest book, getting a contract for that to come out, and therefore I had to turn my attention to sort of marketing and editing of that. So I had to stop writing this new one. And I'd say it's a book in 3 parts, and I'd say I'd got about 80% of the first draft of part 1, which is the biggest part, and then parts 2 and 3 were sketched in a bit more. So I've gone back to that last week, and I'm now back in the flow of it. It's always slightly annoying when you're sort of taking out the momentum of a piece that you've been thinking on and cogitating on, and it sort of flows through every sort of, pore in your skin, and then to set that aside and you lose that momentum and you lose that kind of knowledge of what you've written and what's on what page. So it's very much sort of picking that back up. And yeah, it's been great fun to get back into it. My aim is to finish it by the end of January 2021. 2022. Whether I achieve that or not, we'll have to wait and see. But that's why I haven't been doing much reading, really. Not because necessarily it's not that thing of not liking to read other books in case they sort of seep and percolate into my current work. It's not that so much. It's just I'd rather spend the time writing. So I've only finished one book. It's not very good. It doesn't really deserve a review. It's called Keeping the House by Thais Chin, a London woman of Turkish origin, and she's not only a writer, she's a visual artist and other stuff, and I think that shows that she's not a writer. It's not bad, by which I don't mean it's badly written. It's very competently written, but it's very fragmentary, and there's nothing to impel the reader through it, I felt, and this is why I say she's not a writer first and foremost. I think the fragmentary style is very deliberate, but we only ever get sort of clues and fragmentary insights into what the themes of the book are. So it's a lot about the Turkish drug dealers of Tottenham, North London and Green Lanes, which is infamous for being run by the Turks and the Kurds. And we get a lot of repetition about this one big hit of smuggling heroin through using cabbages and disguising it in cabbages. It just went on and on and on. It kept coming back to it and coming back to it. We do get a glimpse of the difficult position of women in Turkish and Muslim culture, and again we get little insights of little resistances and little fight backs, but you don't get a sense of a great leap forward in attitude. So yeah, it was just really sort of unsatisfactory, and I gave it 2.5 stars. And that's all I'm going to say about it. I'm not going to include it on whenever my next recent reads will be. So I went back to work today, so that means I'm back reading. And one of the things I'm reading is Austerlitz by W.G. Siebold, which is a group buddy read with Zena over at Beating About the Books, Brian at Bookish, and Courtney Ferreter. We're not due to check in till the weekend for our first check-in, so I'm not going to say anything more about that. This is my 3rd Siebold, I think. So there's that. I'm also excited that finally I will get to the new Tom McCarthy novel, which is called The Making of Inception, the movie. But it is fiction, so Tom McCarthy is very sort of postmodern, so we'll see how that fits in. But I'm excited to finally get the chance to pick that up. I think if the weather had been nicer, and to be honest, it's not been bad here. It's been autumnal sunshine, but with one bad day of rain. But if it had been a bit warmer, so that I could have sat in the garden, I might have sneaked away from my own writing to start that. But that didn't happen. And on to, I keep looking for, what are the 4 prompts for Non-Fiction November? Because I love doing Non-Fiction November for 2 reasons. One, I don't read non-fiction. It's a good excuse to get me reading it. And 2, the prompts are so open-ended because they're normally 1-word prompts, which I love. So I've done it in the past 2 years, and I've done all 4 prompts both years. But no sign of the prompts yet. Now, I saw that Steve Donoghue did do a sort of preemptive Non-Fiction November of his own, which is basically an excuse for him to talk about forthcoming non-fiction books coming out in November, which he would encourage us to read. But Steve, we don't know the prompts. We don't know how they're going to fit. And then I thought, well, yeah, fair enough, because I've sort of got in my mind what non-fiction books I want to read, and I don't know the prompts. So there's going to be a question of, can one bend these books to fit the prompts? Now, obviously, push comes to shove, you don't have to do the prompts, you just have to read some non-fiction. But, one likes to play the game, one likes to obey the rules of these, readathons and read-alongs and all that sort of stuff. So what I thought I'd do is I'd show you my intended reads. So the first one is called Being You by Anil Seth, who is a psychologist, and it turns out, because I mentioned it to my son, who's started to train to be a clinical psychologist, he said, oh yeah, he lectured at his university, although he couldn't be sure if he'd attended any of his lectures. So this is a book about consciousness. This is a book about how do we define and how do we prove the notion of I, what is consciousness anyway. And it got really good reviews, which is why I picked it up. And on the back we have quotes from David Eagleman, who wrote one of my favourite fiction books as it goes, although he is also a psychologist and he's a neuroscientist, a brain scientist. He wrote the book Some 40 Tales of the Afterlife, which are 40 short stories between 3 and 4 pages long, which just messes with your head about all the assumptions we make about scale of us to animals to gods, and each story messes with the relationship of us on the scale. I love it. It's one of my favourite books. So Eagleman recommends this. Few people are as well positioned as Anil Seth to tackle the question of consciousness. Beautifully written, crystal clear, deeply insightful. So I'm really looking forward to this. I actually got it in through the post about a couple of weeks ago, and I've had to restrain myself not to dive into it. 1, because I knew I was going to write, and 2, because I just have to hang on another 3 or 4 weeks for Non-Fiction November. Hopefully there's a prompt I can meet with this. I will also say that my current work is also dealing with what is consciousness, what is the subconscious, how do ideas move to the subconscious to the consciousness, and also snatches of songs and earworms and things like that. So really looking forward to that. Now, my next one, The Grammar of Rock by Alexander Theroux. He of Darkenville's Cat and Adultery and other wonderfully bombastic novels. So it was very surprising to find that he's sort of bothering himself with popular culture. It's subtitled Art and Artlessness in 20th Century Pop Lyrics. So the artlessness gives a clue to Theroux's usual sort of misanthropy. So, maybe it's just very, very critical. But I would have expected Alexander Theroux to produce a work of pop theory or pop criticism. And I hadn't opened the book until just preparing for this video. And normally when you get a book of criticism, you expect chapters that maybe are about an artist or an album or a song. No, not here. No chapter headings, nothing. No contents list either. So absolutely no idea what's in here, other than I think the Beatles are in here. So this is typically quixotic Theroux, I suspect. So I'm looking forward to getting into that. Last year there was a prompt. What was it? I can't remember, but I read a book by Kim Gordon, the bass guitarist and singer out of Sonic Youth. I wish I could remember what the prompt was, but anyway, it was terrible. It was a dire read, so I have higher hopes for this. My third book I don't have, it's on the way here. It's Craterless by Plato, which again looks at sort of the origins of language, obviously not in a scientific way because this is Plato 2,500 years ago or whatever it was, but in a philosophical way, just through the power of thinking about language and stuff. So I'm really looking forward to that. Obviously that also feeds into my writing. I think it's quite short. I'm a big fan of Plato, despite the Republic, which does have some tendencies that can invite dictatorship and fascism. But leaving that aside, which is an anachronism, because of course there was no fascism, there was dictatorship or what these Greeks called tyranny, but there's no actual fascism. But leaving that aside, I am team Plato over team Aristotle, virtually all down the line. And indeed I made a rap battle between the two, which if I'm feeling brave enough, I might post the link to, because it's not as... A lot of thought and work went into it, but I'm not a natural rhymester, rhythmic rapper. So perhaps in many ways not my finest work. And finally, a reread for me, Mary Douglas, Purity in Danger. So this is a book from a social anthropology perspective where Mary Douglas talks about taboo, really. And particularly, examining the roots of kosher in sort of Jewish traditions, of, what are the divisions, what are the distinctions between animals which are kosher and you can eat, and animals which aren't, which you can't, and then the deep-lying psychological things behind that. What does that symbolise? Why can you eat a cow but not a pig? And also, this talks about boundaries between things that are profane and those that are either sort of acceptable daily living or even sacred. So I read it many years ago. I was impressed with it, but I found it a bit hard going. This is slightly bigger print than the version because I had an old Penguin book of it where the print was quite small, so this might be easier to tackle through this edition, which is published by Routledge. So there you have it. Those are my proposed 4 reads for Non-Fiction November. I hope and pray they meet the prompts. If they don't, I'm going to have to try and wangle them or just give up the prompt aspect, which I hope I don't have to do, because as I say, I've done them for the last 2 years quite successfully. So that was a sort of bit of life update, bit of TBR, tiny review. Till next time. Thanks very much.